Hello, everybody, and thank you for joining this webinar. So, done in conjunction between Veeam and Quantum. My name is Stefan Esteves, and I'm taking care of the product marketing at Quantum. And I'm here today with Jason Lever, a solution architect at Veeam. The topic of today will be, what are the best practices we can have in order to get protected against ransomware? In terms of agenda, what the idea we'll start just very briefly to explain the situation and why this is a hot topic and why specifically this year is the year of the ransomware, and go through the journey of ransomware, the techniques they use to encrypt, and how we get hit by this kind of Trojans. I think the most important part will be at the end when we'll go through the best practices and how we can get protected, or how we can protect our data when this happens, unfortunately. So let's start. If for those who already have seen this screen, you already know what a ransomware is, and for those who didn't, and I hope it will stay that way, this is exactly what you see when ransomware starts encrypting your server or your laptop or whatever, and basically it will prevent you to get access to your data by encrypting your drives or your attached storage or whatever, and ask you for money. So if you want to get access to the data and decrypt the drives, you need to pay a ransom. That's the basic principle of a ransomware. And this is something that is not really new, because the first one started in, I think it's 1986 or 89. The first one was called PC Cyborg, for if you remember that, if you're a little bit older than or old as I do. But this year is something that is really spreading across all the regions and all the industries. You have here examples from the news all around the world, whether it's the BBC or the New York Times, or even in Japan. And the problem is, when we look a little bit into the figures, is this is getting worse in terms of quantity. The figures you can see here, for instance, is the number of new families discovered in terms of ransomware. And if we compare the first half of this year compared to the full last year, the increase is 172%. That's a huge increase in terms of volume. New families created every day into new ransomwares. The number of attacks is also raising a lot. We moved from roughly a little bit 120,000 a few years ago to more than 80 million last year. And that's the figures coming from Stone Shield's study. But if we look to what Trend Micro is telling us for the first half of the year, we're now up to 29 billion attacks. So it's really huge in terms of volume, and it's really targeting all the countries. It's not something that is specific to North America, Latin America, Europe, Asia, and so on, even if United States and Canada is the first targets in terms of countries. But depending on the type of ransomware, some will attack or target a specific country compared to another one. So it's really always evolving and changing. What is also interesting to see is that this is not only a phenomenon that is hitting the end users, but also the organizations, the companies, and this is growing. And we're almost at a 50-50 ratio. So almost half of the attacks are targeting organizations, whatever the industry. Services, for instance, is one of the sector that's vertical, that's more impacted by ransomware. But there is a lot of cases that we all have seen in the news and so on, in hospitals, universities, and so on. And I will talk a little bit more about one example in a few minutes. But it's really targeting, it's hitting everywhere and everybody. No one is really protected. And why? It's because it's about money, right? The attackers, I would say, are making a lot of money using ransomware techniques. So by encrypting your data and asking for money if you want to get access to this data. So they're creating more sophisticated attacks. Then even now are delivering that as a software as a service, or ransomware as a service, to make sure that even people with low technical skills can use ransomware. And they have created an interesting business model where they give you the software and you have to give a percentage of the ransom you get. So it's really becoming an industry, and that's what it's also explaining the interest they have in developing more and more ransomware and targeting organizations, because an organization means more money than individuals. If we look now to the classic ransomware journey and how we unfortunately get in touch with ransomware. I mean, there are different sources. The first one is a compromised website or a server. So they're just looking around to websites that have some security issues, get control of the website, and then when you visit the website, they will distribute you the ransomware. I mean, keep in mind that some are only 100K size files. And I see a comment, so some people can't hear me, so I'll try to speak a little bit louder. Hope it's better now. Another example is through emails, so classic phishing emails. So you click on a link and you start downloading the ransomware. But now they're using more advanced techniques like social engineering, and they're really targeting specific organizations. It's not just trying to distribute as much as they can, but really focusing on one company or one hospital or one university and attack this one in particular, create like a custom attack and ask for more money because they think this is where they can get more money, of course. In terms of inside the organization, what they try to, the targets are not only the end users, they're also targeting the admins and the LDAP servers and so on. So we'll see that this is even getting more complex with delivering this through different techniques, and they're enhancing it day after day to try to bypass the web filtering or email filtering systems you might have. So for instance, they're in their scripts, they find a way to turn off your application, because you cannot easily encrypt an application that is running. So they find a way to turn off the application. They use anti-sandboxing techniques, especially for targeting the email servers and things like that. They can just install and wait, give you let the ransomware be dormant on the storage, and then wake up the ransomware during the holidays or Thanksgiving or whatever, when people is not so focused into running the IT, and so on, and stealing your credentials. And again, in the example I will talk about in a few minutes, this is exactly what happened. They really start targeting the administrator first and their accounts. In terms of infrastructure, again, it's not only laptops and servers. They're targeting databases, hypervisors, and even some collaboration tools like Office 365. There's specific ransomware targeting Office 365, because again, the idea is to spread. One of the components or characteristics of ransomware is when they start encrypting, they also start spreading. So following all your network and find other devices to encrypt. And if you can do that through the collaboration tools, it's even better, because you're eating more people within the organization. So what we just found out lately is they start thinking that backup is also an interesting target, because one good way to solve the issue of the ransomware is just restore from the backups. So they're also now looking at encrypting the backups. So the journey starts slowing down, and when, for instance, you're creating an air gap when you're replicating your backups, because again, it's following links, it's following your infrastructure. So if there is already an air gap because you're not replicating live, it's already a good thing. And usually the journey stops when reaching tape, if you're using tape as part of your infrastructure, or any offline media using, because if it's offline, then it cannot just access to it and encrypting this data. So that's an example, a classic, I would say, ransomware journey. And we see that what is interesting is this is getting more and more complex, targeting specific applications in organizations, and not only just the laptop of the end user, I would say. in terms of best practices, this is a very high-level thing. We'll go a little bit more in details in a few minutes, and I won't go through all these bullet points, but it's the classic tools are still here to help. Making sure you have the antivirus and malware updated. There are today tools that allow to get rid of the ransomware, and so just there's a website dedicated to that. What I think is more important is making sure that the way you control the privileges of the administrators are really defined, because we see so many times backup admins or admins, logged in with high privileges and doing the whole day working with these high privileges accounts. That's not always a good idea. So making sure that you properly define that, and we'll see this is what happened to one of our customers. And keep one copy of your data offline. And again, I will get back to that. And preparation and planning is also very important. And it could be also just having a Bitcoin account, because one thing about ransomware is when they start encrypting, you have to pay, and if you don't pay, the more you wait, the more expensive it is. Of course, we don't recommend to pay. No one recommends to pay, but just in case, sometimes good to have a Bitcoin account ready. So let's look to this customer. It's a university in the US. Unfortunately, we're not allowed to give you the name. You can easily imagine why. And what happened to them? We have a call with this customer 3 weeks ago, and what was interesting and scary at the same time is how complex was the attack. It was not the classic thing that one of the teachers in the university downloaded something from the web and then started spreading the crypto locker that was the ransomware across the network and so on. It was really a hacking attack mixing with some social engineering. They took a week to prepare the attack and just launch it during the weekend, waiting where there is less resources available, and so on. So and they asked for not the classic ransom. The average ransom this year is around $700. So just to give you an idea, this one was a 6-digit ransom because they spent a lot of time and efforts to target this company, this university. At the end, they succeeded impacting 120 servers. It was mainly Windows servers and many laptops as well. Only their SQL database wasn't encrypted, but they have a lot of logs that get encrypted. And the interesting bit is that they started encrypting the backups and any domain join servers like the vCenter for the VMware infrastructure and so on. So again, this is really a complex attacks. Areas of the university were protected because they were using a specific file system like StorNext, for instance, so the ransomware couldn't encrypt it. But the impact, as you can see, was huge. And at the end, it took a lot of time to really restore everything because they couldn't really trust the remaining servers, so they just decided to start from scratch, and they just survived, I would say, thanks to the tape. So they were using tape as an offline media, and they restore everything from tape. But it took a lot of time because it's a big university. It took almost 3 weeks to fully restore the infrastructure, plus 1 month to fine-tune the infrastructure. They only lost at the end a very small amount of data, a few hundreds of gigs. That was mainly data on teachers' laptop that they were using their own backup with a USB drive and so on. But no one wants to really spend 3 weeks, 24 hours a day for restoring the service plus the tuning. So it's really an important impact. But in that case, really tape saved them. One of the messages here is really to avoid to pay the ransom, make sure that you can recover from your backups. That's one of the best ways to make sure that you have your last line of defense ready. And to do so, there is one rule I want to remind you, and it's a very classic, very old rule, but it's making even more sense nowadays, which is the 3-2-1 backup rule. Using different components, a backup software, of course, and we highly recommend Veeam being the leader protecting virtual environments, and Jason will talk about it better than I do in a few minutes. Some kind of storage for very fast restores, because we've seen that restore is a key element when we want to recover from an attack. Some forms of deduplication, because still it's backup, it's taking a lot of space, and we want to reduce the storage required to store all those backups, and getting an offline copy. So that's the key elements. And how they work in this 3-2-1 rule is fairly easy. The number 3 means that you need to have 3 copies of your data. Your primary one, the one you have on your primary storage, so your production data, 1 copy on backup, and 1 copy, I would say, a third copy. This copy can be on disk with deduplication on tape, whatever, but make sure that at least there's 3 copies. 2 of them should be in different media, different types of media, because if you reach one backup target and this one is replicating the backups, then the ransomware can also follow the link. So it's always good to have different media, and making sure that at least one is offsite, and I will add offline as well, as we're talking about the ransomware, because being offline means then it cannot be reached by the ransomware. So tape is really, I will just take 2 seconds to talk about tape, because I think it's really the last line of defense. And again, Jason will talk more about earlier in the process of backup, but I just remind you that it's still it has changed since years. It's evolved in the sense that now tape has self-healing systems, can detect when there is an issue, send an alerts, making sure we can move the data to another tape, and so on. It's still the lowest cost we can find in terms of cost per terabyte, especially for long-term retention. So it's not only protecting against the ransomware, but being offline, but it's also for long-term retention. It's the best cost we can find. Performance keep increasing roughly every 2 years. The performance is doubling, and there is also some archiving nice features. So I won't spend much time on that. If you're interested in tape, you can go to our website, and we just released 2 new tape products that has the highest density in the market, and so on. So if you're interested, you have the links available in the interface, and if not, just go to the website. And that's, I would say, my introduction. And if you want to avoid 3 weeks of restoring, I think Veeam can explain a little bit more how you can move from weeks to few seconds, I guess. So, Jason, I'll let you carry on from now.
All right. Thanks a lot, and thanks everybody for joining. So I'll start with just a little bit of an introduction to Veeam, just for those who are not familiar with us. So we are data protection, we call it data availability for today's modern enterprise. So especially in a world where ransomware is becoming such a large threat, keeping our applications online, or having tools to help us keep our applications online is just as critical as ever, right? So if we take a look at, Veeam as a company, just really quick, we're a little over 200,000 customers now, 41,000 or so pro partners, so partners out there who, sell Veeam products. We are 3,500 new customers a month. We're over 2,000 employees worldwide. So you can kind of look at some of the stats. I'm not going to go through all of them, but to just give you an idea, we've been here for some time now doing this in the virtualized space. So our primary focus are for you out there who have virtualized infrastructures, right? So either Hyper-V or VMware. That's what we focus on today. So if you take a look at the modern enterprise, there really is a gap with what people are doing today. If you look at legacy backup, often people accept that they have recovery time and recovery point objectives that take hours or days. We talked about a minute ago when someone needed to get their data back from a ransomware attack. It took days to do it, right? And that's really it often comes down to not having a modernized data availability solution in place to address those challenges. And oftentimes those solutions don't give you the ability to test, right? The backup strategy you have in place, or the DR strategy you have in place. What ends up happening is you run a backup every day. It gives you a report that says, hey, the backup job ran, and that's it. You don't actually know if you're able to restore from them. And most people don't test. They just kind of go along with what the backup application says. So Veeam's availability capabilities really do that. We're looking to improve SLAs, be able to test all your backups, all your replicas, and reducing the chance of when you do need to use those backups that they're going to fail on you. Right? So obviously if you have an issue and you need to use your backup, that's the last thing you need to fail, because you already just got done having to put out fires with the primary data copy going down. So So we address this in a few different ways. We address this by offering high-speed recovery, data loss avoidance, giving you the ability to verify your data, verify your recoverability, leveraging the data in a sandbox type environment. I'll go into that in a moment. And then giving you complete visibility into the infrastructure. And we lay these capabilities on top of modern storage, such as Quantum, right? On top of cloud, virtualization, and we work with, again, with a lot of the industry-leading partners, including Quantum. So if we break this down, those 5 key areas I spoke about, when we say high-speed recovery, what we're looking to do is very rapid recovery of what you need when you need it. I'm going to go into more of that in a moment, but oftentimes what people run into is they have a strategy in place, but the strategy often doesn't give them granular capabilities of restoring. They may have a volume with many virtual machines on it replicated somewhere else. They can get the volume back with the many virtual machines on it, but they may only need one server. Maybe one server got attacked via ransomware, right? So they just need to get that one back. So instead of having to bring back everything, we just want to get back the one server. Data loss avoidance, being able to have near CDP, near continuous data protection, without necessarily having to pay the cost for full-time CDP. Verified recoverability, being able to recover or guaranteed to be able to recover every file and application every time. Again, it's a very critical piece that people don't focus on, being able to know that they can use the strategies they have in place. Leveraging your data. So backups, if you figure most of the time, just sit there. They don't do anything unless you need to restore from them. So Veeam with Quantum gives you a way to be able to leverage your backup data as a testing environment for risk mitigation. Making sure that updates and patches that come out don't affect your infrastructure. You can test against those backups. While we're not mostly known for the complete visibility portion of what we do, a lot of today's enterprise, to be able to mitigate risk, is to be able to have visibility into issues before they ever occur. This doesn't speak heavily to the ransomware message for today, but I do want to touch on it just because, if I'm going to have my data storage running out of storage, right, for my VMs, then I need to know if that's going to happen. I need to know if my Veeam backup infrastructure is going to have issues or getting utilized. So I'll talk a little more about that. All right, let's move to the next slide here. So let's talk about fast and flexible restores. As I said earlier, it's common when people have a strategy in place where they say, volume is being replicated somewhere with a lot of VMs, or maybe they have a VM level backup somewhere, but they really can't reach into that VM and grab out just what they need. We did a poll of administrators and found that 80% of the time that the restore needs to be done, whatever the reason be, it may be a ransomware, it could be someone just deleting a file, but it's a transactional recovery. It's something small. It could be an email. It could be something as big as a user's mailbox or files. 20% of the time, it's the entire server, right? So 20% of the time, you need to get that entire VM back to get you back online where you need to be. So with that, I want to talk about some of the granular restore capabilities that Veeam has, when we're sitting on top of Quantum for our backup storage. So initially what we're talking about here is the Veeam Explorer. So Veeam Explorer, we have a couple of them. We have one for Microsoft Exchange. So what this does is it gives you the ability to do agentless recovery of individual items within an Exchange mailbox. So when I say items, that can be a mail item, calendar item, contact item, et cetera. And anything in a mailbox that someone may have, you can do the granular level restore directly from an image level backup. Okay, and as I said, there's nothing installed in Exchange normally that runs. There's no agents or anything, and they're presented persistently that you need to worry about taking away your resources. Okay, we also have that for SharePoint. So SharePoint is going to be sites. It could be objects, so things are files, documents and such from SharePoint sites. Again, granular recovery there. Active Directory. So Active Directory is going to be things like OUs, computer accounts, users. It does maintain user passwords. So if you go restore a bunch of users or computer accounts, you'll have to join those back to the domain. It'll maintain all of that. Okay. And then if you look at database level, this is pretty critical here. So database failures. I need to get the whole database back. I don't need to restore my entire SQL server. in this case, but I want to get my database back. Or if I'm a DBA, I may be more along the lines of, hey, I know we do Veeam image level backups every night, but you know what? I really need to have point-in-time recovery. I need to be able to roll back logs to individual transactions. Well, so in addition to Veeam doing an agentless image level backup, we will go do log shipping as well and store the logs right next to your Veeam backups on your Quantum. So you do have that granularity of saying, hey, I want the whole server back from last night, or I just want to undo a transaction that happened 15 minutes ago because it's causing me issues on my application that's sitting on top of SQL. And the same capability holds true for Oracle, so archive logs or image level backup as well. And this is all in the Veeam availability suite, or Veeam availability platform that we offer here. So you don't purchase Veeam Explorer for exchange. You don't purchase those products a la carte. It's all part of the base product that you buy. So, and that's kind of a good segue into licensing, just so you understand how we work. Everything that Veeam does from a licensing perspective is on source side sockets only. So, like the VMware would do, right? If I have a cluster of 3 hosts, each one has 2 physical processors, I need 6 licenses. It doesn't matter if I'm running Linux or Windows or Exchange or whatever. It's the same licensing model either way. So if you figure, so we have actually 16 different types of restores you can do. So we talked about granularity, getting back online, only what I need. I had this folder get encrypted. I need to get the folder back, files back, right? So I can do that as well. So I could do things like VM guest OS files. So that could be your Windows file system stuff, right? So there's 16 file systems there. There's VM disks, VM DKs, VMX, VHDs, VM files, vCloud director objects. So you really have a lot of different, whatever scenario it is that you need to restore from, you have that without having to grab that entire VM or that entire volume back. If we look at an entire VM restore, I said it's 20% of the time. But if it's 20% of the time, then that's probably if the whole server goes down or it has been held ransom or whatever it may be, it's probably a bigger issue than if I just have some files that were deleted, right? I need to get the entire application back online to where I can use it. So in the case where you're backing up to Quantum QXS backup storage, you have the ability to use what Veeam calls instant VM recovery. And really the way the feature works is pretty straightforward. The VM goes down. It's inaccessible, whatever the reason may be. Your users cannot get to it now. What we will do is we will power on the backup file directly from where it sits. So we're actually, in this case, running your production VM off of your backup storage. Okay? So in that case, it's not a permanent restore. I'm running off of my backup. I do need to make a migration of some type. So if I'm a VMware user, I would leverage storage vMotion to now migrate the virtual hard disk to where it needs to go to production storage. Or if I'm a Hyper-V user, I would use Hyper-V's native migration capability to migrate the virtual hard disk. So again, very fast restore. This type of restore, being that we're not moving data to get you back online, takes 2 to 3 minutes. So it's very fast to get the application back online, no matter how large it is. Very important, if you find out the server has been held for ransom, you've got your recovery points, let's go ahead and tie those things up, right? Let's get it back online with very little data loss. So we talked about needing to be able to verify recoverability and leveraging our data. So in addition to being able to power on the backup for a restore purpose, we can power on the backup or backups for the case of an on-demand sandbox. And we can verify these backups. And we do what we call sure backup, where when we power on the VMs, we do a series of tests against them. So we will check for heartbeat, we'll check for ping, we'll actually ping the adapters, and we're going to check for application scripts. So we have a predefined script that will say, hey, this is a web server, and I need to check for XYZ ports being available and listening when the application comes online. When that's done, as the administrator, you get an email report that says, hey, last night after my 8 p.m. backups ran, Veeam went along and powered them on at 9 p.m. or 10 p.m. or whatever you schedule it to do, and it verified that I actually can recover from them. Versus just sending me an email report that said the job happened, I know that they can be powered on and ran. So you'll notice that when we power these on, there's a little cloud around them. And that's because what Veeam does is we mount the virtual machines to an isolated virtual network adapter. It doesn't have any uplinks on it. So the counterparts, their production counterparts, can't see that these virtual machines are running again. So what's cool about that, as an administrator, I can log into this on-demand sandbox, this virtual lab, and I can do things like Windows tests. I can do application updates or whatever it may be to ensure that I don't go deploy those updates against production servers, right? And have any issues that I can't foresee. So again, these are read-only backups. So when I turn that off, my backups are unharmed, and now I can kind of move forward. So, all right. So if we take a look at Veeam, also obviously, if you look at the name, so we have Veeam Availability Suite, but we also have Veeam Backup and Replication. When Veeam says replication, we're looking at this as a host-based replication. Yes, we can take backups and copy them off-site. So for an example, maybe I have a QXS at one location, I want to copy it to a DXI, or DXI at one location, I want to copy it to a QXS. Or whatever your hardware configuration may be, you want to get backups off-site to comply with 321. But another way to address that is replicating at the VM level or the host level. So in that case, what Veeam is doing is we're taking the entire VM and we're copying it to infrastructure that is somewhere else. The only requirement for Veeam is that that infrastructure be the same hypervisor, meaning if it's VMware on one side, it needs to be VMware on the other, Hyper-V needs to be Hyper-V. Okay? So this is really your absolute best possible RTO, because in this case, these are full-blown VMs registered on production type hardware that you can simply power on when a failure occurs. The way Veeam powers these on is using a failover plan. What that means is if I have a multi-node application, let's say that it has a database, I need to have a domain controller over there, I need to have a front-end web server, whatever the combination is, Veeam will power those on in order in which they need to come on. So I may want my domain controller to come on first, then my database, then my web server or application server or whatever it may be. But as we power these on, we'll do things like changing the IP addresses. So if you have a different subnet at the other location, we'll change that, at least on the Windows guest operating systems. As I said earlier, though, one of the things I want to go back to is Veeam's licensing is specifically on the source side only, right? So if I have, again, 6 sockets, VMware sockets, for an example, with, 30 VMs or whatever, replicating to this other location does not require additional Veeam licensing because it's just a target for us. It's not a source in this scenario. So you don't have to buy Veeam replication. It's a functionality that comes with it. So one of the challenges people face when they look at doing host-based replication is bandwidth. They find that, hey, my connection from site A to site B just cannot achieve sending that much data, or it drops packets. Right? It loses connection quite often. So Veeam has what's called WAN accelerators. Really what WAN accelerator is a global cache that we keep of data blocks that have been sent from one side to the other. So when my replication job runs, we'll reference the cache, and we'll say, have these data blocks already been sent? If yes, then I'll pull them out of that target side cache to create my restore point. I mean, it's global dedupe. It's a pretty simple concept, but Veeam has that integrated directly into our application. Now, don't get me wrong, it's not TCP/IP optimization. It's not doing anything for any data going across the WAN. It's doing it specifically for Veeam's traffic that goes across the WAN. Okay. So we talked about needing to verify backups. It's just as important that we can verify these replicas. So the same functionality of having the on-demand sandbox applies here. And we call this Assure Replica. So we can power on the replicas, heartbeat, ping, scripts, and an email report that tells me my DR strategy works. So I know when I get attacked by ransomware, I can fail over to this other site and just flip these things on, and they're going to have me back online immediately. If you can also use this, as I said, on-demand sandbox. So for the same purposes you would do this from a QXS or backups, if you do have a DR location, I would recommend doing this. I mean, these are real VMs. You're not powering on backups. You can just flip them on and again, use them for what you use the DR site that usually sits there cold until a disaster comes. Use it for dev, test, development, things like that. You can access these VMs that are powered on. And I said complete visibility earlier. As I said, these aren't products that Veeam is widely known for. I mean, we're definitely known more for the Veeam backup and replication portion of things. But we do have the Veeam Availability Suite, and when we say suite, it has Veeam Backup, but it also has Veeam One. So Veeam One is a built-for virtualization alerting tool, a reporting tool. It does add things like capacity planning for your virtual infrastructure. There's 140 or so predefined alarms for the virtual infrastructure. All of your common things that you may have in a vCenter, for an example. So data store latency. It could be things like high CPU usage and such is all built into Veeam One. But it gives you also advanced monitoring, availability, backup and replication infrastructure. So are my Veeam components being overutilized? When is my QXS going to run out of backup storage if I keep trending this way with the number of amount of data that I'm trying to store? So again, that's the availability suite. If you're someone out there who's using Microsoft System Center, we do have a management pack that will bring all of into your interface, all in one view to have that. All right, so moving on to our closing slide here, we'll take some questions. So obviously, if you want more information, you can go to www.quantum.veeam.com/Veeam, or Veeam.com. There is a free 1 terabyte virtual DXI there as well. You can download a free 30-day trial of the Veeam Availability Suite also. You can try it with your virtual DXI and see how it performs for you. And there are some links, if you're looking at attachments and links section of the BrightTalk interface here, you can grab direct links to these items as well. Okay, so let's take a look at some questions we have here. Stefan, what do we have? What have we missed in question-wise?
So I've seen one. So the first one is the risk of ransomware primarily against files on cooked file systems. So our devices used as raw storage also at risk. For instance, well, I mean, I can get back to the example of the university. There is ransomware that are specifically targeting some file systems, some environments. So let's say, example, Windows or even now Android, so mobiles as well and things like that. They're obviously targeting the classic ones. In the example, for instance, this university, part of the infrastructure was also using specific, in that case, was a quantum file system called StoreNext for their video environments, and they've seen that the ransomware was stored in there but couldn't execute, so it couldn't really do its job of encrypting. Same applied to the object storage. They were using Lattice, our object storage appliances, and in fact it couldn't encrypt this storage unit, so they use it for restoring as a trusted area. So it really depends on the ransomware. Some are really specific, but obviously they're targeting the mainstream file systems. What else do we have as another question?
Let's see here. Is it best practice to have your Veeam backup servers not joined to your domain to help avoid this type of attack? That is definitely one layer of protection you can apply there, right? If it's not as easy to resolve names across your domain, then yeah, that would definitely is one layer you could do there. Obviously, encrypting your backups would be an option as well, depending on if you're backing up to DXI or not. I don't think we want to encrypt them there, but to your QXS, you can encrypt them. But really, the biggest thing is 321. I think that's our biggest thing. We try to aim there is to just have multiple copies of your data as well. The biggest thing I think we would want to preach to you. So.
Yeah, and make sure. I mean, if I take again the example of this customer, is for them it was a perfect storm because in fact they fired their backup. I mean, and again the new ones was just in the middle of the transition, but making sure that the access rights are properly configured between Veeam and DXI, for instance, making sure that the backup account is not used 24 hours a day and only when you need it, and things like that as well. I mean, the way you configure the access rights and how you use it, and not always logged on with high privileges and things like that, is just part of the best practices as well. I see another question. So if they encrypt your data in your server for a long time, 1 year, and your backup job backing up those encrypted data until it overwrites all of the old data, so it's only leave you with encrypted data. I would say yes and no. I mean, of course, if they succeed to encrypt your backups, or your primary data that is encrypted, and you will back up the files, you will back up encrypted files. But keep in mind that the encryption is a process that takes quite a long time. So I'm sure that you will find out that you have this issue before 1 year. But that's the interest of having a longer retention. That's also the interest, even if they reach your backups, to have this hair gap when you are replicating. Most of the time you're replicating every night and so on. Most of the time you find out very quickly that this is happening, because you have a big screen happening everywhere showing you that this is encrypting, this is encrypted, and so on. So and if not, as always, you still have the last line of defense to getting an offline media, which is supported by Veeam. Veeam can properly manage a tape library without any problem and get a copy on tape as an offline media.
Yeah, with Veeam and Quantum, there really isn't just one right way to do this, right? There's several different ways you could protect yourself from ransomware threat. I think, as I talked about earlier, share backup. If you encrypted backup file, obviously Veeam's not going to be able to power on and test it for you. You'll know right away. If you're doing really sure backup jobs, you'll be able to test that backup. If backup can be moved off the tape, right? And store it offline. They've been verified. Now you can get them out where you can use them as you need them later down the road. So, all right, let's see here. So we use Veeam. What I really want to know is protect my always online backup data on the trays. That's the real question. Yeah, I mean, I think that's what we were talking about. Just tape, cloud, whatever you need to do to multiple copies of it. There's other best practices. Using, Stefan said, your administrator account, making that more of a restrictive account that isn't used commonly, right? So there's a whole suite of different best practices to help protect that. But I think still the best one is getting that data offline, honestly. So, you want to grab one there, Stefan?
Yeah, there is one question about performance between deduplication appliance, which is not Quantum, and the Scala tape library using Veeam. What's interesting is, as you can see, I mean, the 3-to-1 solution is with Veeam and Quantum provides all the different media, and you have the end-to-end solution. Some vendors are not big fans of tape. We are, because we are in this business for tape for 30 years now, and the integration we're getting with Veeam is getting more and more important, and you will see very soon the next versions, for instance, that can directly connect tape to disk and get that fully controlled by Veeam and so on. So I don't want to enter into all the details because this is something that will come soon, but there is already this capability to move data from disk to tape without going through the whole infrastructure, just to improve the performance. So that's why it makes sense to keep one layer of tape, and that will not slow down your I would say your deduplication appliance or backup process if you are in front of it. And I think
Okay, see, there's a question. Will NFS shares provide level of protection versus ransomware as compared to ATFS shares? Well, so if you look at the way Veeam handles, even this really, but NFS, the way Veeam handles NFS is we don't connect directly to NFS. We do require that run through a Linux server, and you mount the NFS share to the Linux server, and how Veeam goes about backing up to it. So that is definitely an option. In which case, I would say it's definitely an additional layer of security because you can set credentials on that Linux server. You can also do the same thing with SIPs, right? I mean, you can set access control on an account specifically for your network share as well, even to a DXI. Right. So in each case, my recommendation would be obviously use credentials that are unique for that use case only, service credentials, but that gives you an additional layer there that they could access. For an example, when Veeam accesses those, we open up connection when we're running the backup, but it's not a persistent connection on Windows, right? And then Veeam's password database is encrypted, the actual where we keep our passwords and all that stored for those servers. So there definitely is a layer of protection there. to my knowledge, also today, a good thing is I don't know that people are writing ransomware for Veeam VBK files, which is our file format. I'm not saying that they won't, but I'm just saying that as of today, I don't know that we're considered as a popular file format to write ransomware for. But I'm sure we'll eventually get there as we keep adding people and customers and such. So, all right, let's see here. What else do we have? What else do you see, Stefan, for us to answer here?
So I think there's a best practice list somewhere online to protect against ransomware. Sorry. Yes, I mean there are websites dedicated to ransomware answers and stuff like that. And there is, if I don't have the URL right now in mind, on the website, on our website, for instance, there is white papers around ransomware that you can download and have a look at. What else?
There's a couple of questions that are the duplicates, kind of.
Yep. Okay. Well, I mean, maybe we can, if there's other questions and so on, we can take that offline. I guess we'll get the contacts and get in touch. Anyway, I mean, I would like to thank you all for attending to this webinar. You can always contact Veeam or Quantum reps if you have any question around this topic or other topics regarding data protection in general. Jason, I don't know if you want to add something.
Nope, I certainly appreciate everybody's time today. And as I said, there's links in the Bright Talk interface here that you can click on as well to get some more information. But as you said, reach out if you have anything else that we can answer for you. So thanks again.
Okay. Good day.